Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's online briefing session around the Places for People project in Bournville. My name's Joe Green. I'm Travel Demand Manager at Birmingham City Council. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Rebecca Hawthorne, who will be moderating the meeting chat, and also Tim and Riddy from Sustrans, who are a delivery partner on this programme, and they'll be supporting with the presentation and also answering some of the questions at the end of the session. We've got an hour this evening to take you through a bit of information around the Places for People programme, the policy context to that, and also the Emergency Active Travel Fund and how we've approached that in Birmingham and continue to do so. We'll also give a bit of overview of low traffic neighbourhoods, what's happened to date in terms of developing some measures in Bournville, and also the sort of what happens next and some opportunities around future delivery. The presentation will probably sort of take about 40 minutes and then we'll have 20 minutes at the end for questions. We have had some questions sent in to us advance, which we'll partly try to address through the presentation, but also we've summarised some of the most commonly asked questions at the end too. If people do have questions and comments throughout the presentation, please do type those in the Q&A meeting chat. Colleagues on the presentation will try and respond to any quick questions that they're able to. We'll also review those and try and cover them in the question session at the end. But we will take a copy of all comments posted during tonight's session and feed that in to the engagement that we are doing around this scheme. We've had apologies this evening from Councillor Liz Clements, who had wanted to join but is away at the moment. I know Councillor Fred Grindrod is hoping to join, and if he's able to.
Joe, I'm here.
Oh, Liz, brilliant. Sorry,
Liz. I was unsure. No, I'm here. I'm on the line, as it were. Even
better. Okay, I'll rewind. I'm delighted to be joined tonight with Councillor Liz Clements, and we'll ask Liz to add any comments she has just prior to the question and answer session.
And Joe, I'm here as well.
And Fred is here as well, even better. This is the problem with presenting in an empty room to a blank screen. So I'm delighted that we're joined by both of your local councillors this evening, and Liz Clements and Fred Grindrod will join us in the question and answer session at the end. I was going to say that we're in regular contact with them, but obviously not enough at the start of sessions, and they have played a key role in representing correspondence that they've had from local residents, feeding back questions, comments, concerns, and we'll continue to work closely with them as this programme moves forward.
Sorry to interrupt, Joe. I'm getting a couple of people saying they're not hearing. If somebody who can hear could let me know, that would be very reassuring. Just so I can check that we are being heard by the majority of people. Wait and see if anybody pops into the chat. That's not very reassuring. I'm not seeing anybody at the moment.
Okay, I will continue possibly talking to nobody, possibly talking to some people out there, and we'll see if we continue to get messages in the meeting chat as to whether people can or can't hear us. But I will start on the presentation. In terms of the Places for People programme in Birmingham, this was something that we launched back in June, but it is something that we've been working on developing for quite some time, and I'll explain how it fits with various sort of council plans and strategies. But the idea of Places for People is around reclaiming local streets so that they are places where people are able to walk and cycle for local journeys, but also places where children can play, friends and neighbours can socialise, where there is a nicer, more welcoming environment with cleaner air, quieter places and a much safer environment. And the way that that is achieved is through less traffic. This is something that is central to the Birmingham Transport Plan that we published in January 2020 for consultation. The transport plan had 4 big moves, one of which was prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods. And what that big move seeks to achieve is an environment where walking and cycling are how people can get around their local area for local journeys most of the time where they can. What that also wants to do is ensure that cars no longer dominate street life around homes and schools, and residential neighbourhoods and local centres are places where people are put first. As well as the Birmingham Transport Plan, this also links into a whole host of other policies and strategies that the City Council has. The Birmingham Walking and Cycling Strategy that Cabinet approved at the start of this year outlined how we wanted to develop low traffic neighbourhoods and car-free school streets to encourage walking and cycling through filtered permeability, which is a bit of a technical term for modal filters that we'll touch on later, through parking management and through public realm improvements. This also supports our road safety strategy that we've had in place for a number of years now, in terms of creating safer roads that are maintained, operated and improved in as safe a way as possible, and linked to that 20-mile-per-hour speed limits on residential roads and in local centres, which is something that the council is committed to rolling out across Birmingham. This also supports our draft clean air strategy in terms of reducing air pollution across the city, partly by improving the transport network and journey options available to people, so that safe, sustainable travel is an option that people are able to and do choose. And linked to that, back in June last year, when the City Council declared a climate emergency and established a Route to Zero task force, transport is one of 7 work streams within that. And that is focused on how transport plays its part around the climate emergency and reducing emissions. As well as walking and cycling, road safety and clean air, this programme is also around a lot of sort of health and wellbeing benefits through improving and increasing physical activity, but also some of the mental health and emotional well-being benefits that can be achieved through more people feeling able to walk and cycle. And this isn't just something that Birmingham City Council is progressing on its own. This is something that is supported by central government, and in the gear change cycling and walking plan that the Department for Transport published at the start of July, they had a very heavy focus on low traffic neighbourhoods and the part that that plays in encouraging walking and cycling, recognising that road closures or point closures is a great way of enabling walking and cycling in residential side streets. Clear as we will be when we talk about low traffic neighbourhoods that it is still possible to access roads in the area, but what this takes out is the through traffic or the rat runs and cut throughs, and that by achieving low traffic neighbourhoods, accidents, pollution and noise can all be dramatically reduced for residents. So this is an area of work that the City Council has been keen to develop for some time, and we've been progressing. And then, as people will be fully aware, 6 months ago at the end of March, just as we were coming to the end of the consultation on the draft Birmingham Transport Plan, the whole world changed, and as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic, we were placed into lockdown. There were all sorts of restrictions in place, and that had a major impact on transport and how people were getting around, if indeed they were getting around at all. What we saw almost overnight was a significant reduction in traffic levels overall, at one stage down to below a third of usual levels, and a lot of people commented on how, as a result, there were quieter streets, improved air quality and a more pleasant residential environment across the city. And in a very sort of strange and undesirable way, we kind of had a citywide demonstration of low traffic neighbourhoods across Birmingham. We saw more people walking and cycling, often for their daily exercise or for leisure and recreation. We saw people often shopping more locally, very often by foot or by bike. There were some challenges with that. I know with quieter roads in places we did see increased speeding and dangerous driving, partly because of less traffic on the road, and I guess partly because of psychologically people's mindset at that time. And there have been, and there still are, real sort of challenges around public transport, both in terms of capacity on buses, trains and trams, and also people's confidence in using that at the current time. And as we sort of as we gradually ease out of lockdown restrictions, although right now we're almost easing back into some of them, there is a chance to lock in some of these benefits, but also we need to ensure that walking and cycling is a viable choice for people, because if people aren't able to or don't want to use public transport and everyone turns to private car, then that's going to present us with some real issues and challenges around congestion and all the other negative connotations. So then what we want to do is, as an authority, how can we try and lock in some of these benefits moving forward and as part of the longer term vision that we want to see for our city. And the way we sort of put that together into something that could be taken forward was the emergency transport plan that the City Council published in May 2020 and again was agreed by Cabinet in June. And this set out our plans for a low carbon clean air recovery, and that was all around creating safer space for walking and cycling, but also enabling this new phenomenon of social distancing. And within that document, we set out our desire to deliver 2 low traffic neighbourhoods within Birmingham alongside some other measures, and also carry out some work to identify how this will be extended across the whole city. When it was published, this was a plan with no sort of resource behind it, but was something that we were committed to delivering. But fairly soon on, the Department for Transport announced the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and we were fortunate enough to have some resource for delivering some of the proposals outlined in the Emergency Transport Plan. The EATF is part of a £2 billion package that the government have announced for supporting walking and cycling over the coming years. £250 million of that has been released this year, primarily for councils to implement temporary interventions to create an environment that's safe for both walking and cycling. The Department for Transport have been very clear with their expectations on this, that local authorities need to demonstrate they have swift, meaningful plans to reallocate road space to cyclists and pedestrians. And also in the guidance that was issued for that funding, one of the approaches measured was around low traffic filtered neighbourhoods, and that the quickest and cheapest way of achieving this road space reallocation is road closures or point closures. The Emergency Active Travel Fund has been released in 2 tranches. We're currently underway in delivering tranche 1 schemes. That's roughly for the current quarter, July to September. There is a second tranche which, through the combined authority, we have submitted an application for. We hope to hear on that very soon, and schemes delivered as part of tranche 2 will be delivered across October and March, and towards the end of the presentation I will outline some of the initial thinking for how that will be taken forward and what it could mean for Bournville. In terms of some of the figures, we have received over £1 million from central government for tranche 1. We actually received more than the original indicative allocation we were given and bid for, partly because the quality of the bid that went in through the combined authority. So we've got over £1 million, which we've also topped up with £500,000 of match funding from City Council other programme. And through this, we're currently bringing forward 14 schemes through the Emergency Active Travel Fund. Some of those are low traffic neighbourhoods. We've included 2 low traffic neighbourhood pilots in Kings Heath and Lascelles, and we're currently bringing forward the first phase of both of those pilots. But what we also wanted to do was deliver some sort of early demonstration measures in parts of the city ahead of hopefully further delivery as part of tranche 2. And Bournville was one of 3 areas selected for these sort of early measures, along with Castlevale and Moseley. Just to share some information on some of the other schemes, there are a series of pop-up cycle lanes that have been delivered across the city, that are sort of being constructed as we speak, including one on the A38 linking Selly Oak and the existing A38 cycle route to Northfield, the section between Selly Oak and Northfield being a bus and cycle lane in a large part. I'm aware that some people will have questions on that scheme, and already we have had comments and concerns raised around that. We aren't planning on touching on the pop-up cycle lanes and the bus lane too much this evening, but if there is time and we're able to say a bit more on that, we will do. But really tonight we want to focus on the Bournville places for people measures that we are bringing forward as well. There's also some work in the city centre to deliver the city centre segments initiative that was first outlined in the transport plan, a couple of local centre schemes in Moseley and Sturchley, and then the places for people measures. We are delivering to a very different timescale than usual, partly because this is designed as sort of an emergency response, and we are still dealing with an emergency situation. As people will be aware from the Prime Minister's announcement today, we are still experiencing real sort of challenges around COVID-19 and the changes that is meaning to our daily lives. So initially we are looking at making quick temporary changes to the streets so that we then can start to look at how that space can be used differently, especially for walking and cycling, but also social distancing. As we move forward over time, we have an opportunity to look at how some of these changes might be made more permanent, but that would very much be done in partnership with local residents, organisations, community groups and key stakeholders. And we are very much at the sort of start of this process, and as well as over time the level of design increasing, we're very much looking for the level of engagement to increase, and for what we deliver to be shaped by people who live, work, visit the area where we are making changes. I'm now going to hand across to Riddy from Sustrans to provide a little bit of information around the low traffic neighbourhood approach, and also to share some of the initial feedback around what's proposed in Bournville.
Hi, good evening everyone. Yes, thank you, Joe. So a low traffic neighbourhood in general is a group of residential streets where through trips by motorised vehicles are discouraged. So that means that you have an area of residential streets where where the residents get to go there. They can still drive there, visitors can come, deliveries can come, you know, social people can still get there. You can still get to every door, but the people using that residential street to get through to the other side of that area, they're prevented from doing so easily, and so hopefully wouldn't then utilise those routes. And in often cases, they just can't get from one side to the other. So that's what a low traffic neighbourhood is looking at. You can still get into all those streets, but you can't drive through. So it's reducing that through traffic. And because it reduces that through traffic, it also looks at providing some safer crossings and cycle infrastructure, because there's less traffic within that residential area, so it's easier to walk across the road. And it's just nicer to be outside where there's less traffic moving through that area. So if we move on to the next one, Joe. Oh, so this is happening, you may have seen this is happening all around the country, and this is an example here of a scheme that was in Waltham Forest, and this was a much larger scheme, of course, and it was done area wide, but these are two images of the same road there, Oxford Road in Walthamstow, and on the left was pre any of the measures, and obviously on the right is post. So it's looking at how a space can change and the use of the space can change, and the way people see it and use it and access it and feel comfortable around it, and the safety around it as well. So this is, yeah, and there's lots of evidence from Waltham Forest that we are looking at as part of some of the evidence to back up some of what we're doing, which is here on this slide. So not only does it, the evidence from Waltham Forest showed that on average, people increased their walking by 32 minutes a week and their cycling by 9 minutes a week on average per person. So not only has the walking and cycling gone up, but also you can see here on the right of the screen, life expectancy went up by 7 months, but also the economic impact of a low traffic neighbourhood. There's less empty shops and retail vacancies, and there's more spend. So one study from Transport for London showed that spends went up almost 40%. So it's economically beneficial for an area as well. And people just enjoy using their streets more, so the community value also goes up. So yes, thank you, Joe. So to date, in the Bournville area, I know that this is one of the main questions a lot of people have been asking and a lot of people have been concerned about, is the limited or the engagement level that has been there so far. The timescales that we've been working to have been very fast. This sort of infrastructure usually goes in over months, years sometimes, with the consultation, and we've been asked to do it in weeks. So there has been limited consultation prior to the measures going in, but this is different in that we are able to keep consulting all the way through the trial. This is a live trial. We want to continue to get that feedback from residents and businesses in the area all the way through these measures going in. There is room to move them if they're not in the right places or adjust them. They aren't going in as permanent. They are a trial, and we'll continue to consult all the way through. So, of course, you will have hopefully seen the Commonplace digital platform. So that's the space where you can make all the comments as the trial continues to go ahead. And then we'll be putting more on the social media, and we've sort of made ourselves contactable as much as possible. And you've all hopefully had a letter drop, which is how you found out about this event this evening. But we do want to do more face-to-face engagement. We are fully aware that being online doesn't reach all the audiences, and we are looking for ways to do more on-street pop-up activities, more public meetings and more drop-in events, but looking at those being organised in line with the latest guidelines. And of course, with the latest announcement, we'll have to be looking at how we can do that safely. And then there will be some involvement with from people and hopefully from residents and locals from with the monitoring as part of this as well. But rest assured, we are aware that it's not ideal to do everything online, so we will be looking at how we can do this in other ways as well. Yeah, thank you. OK, so from Commonplace, we have had quite a lot of feedback, and as of yesterday, there's been 350 comments from on the Bournville tile on the Bournville measures, and 290 of those people live in Bournville, so it's mostly coming from people that live in the area. I should state that these are comments and not numbers of respondents. People can make more than one comment because all the comments are anonymous. They can make as many comments as they like, so there may be some people that have made more than one, but overall 46% are positive comments. So we are looking at a positive outlook on this, but we are also aware that there are some negative comments, some people not quite sure and asking lots of questions. So we can go through a few of those in the next couple of slides. We've pulled out sort of a handful of some of the comments that people have made. So these are all direct quotes from Commonplace, where people like it. They like the idea that it will help their journey to school with their children, or will help have a positive impact on the air quality. And then where people haven't liked it, people are concerned about increasing congestion by losing access to certain roads, and some people are concerned that it will people won't understand it, and so may cause difficulty, chaos. So that's a few comments there. There's a few more, I think, on the next slide as well. So again, positive. People are looking at. People like it. It's a great idea. It might help them to cross by foot or on bike, and that people that live on one of the roads, so Franklin Road, that the road suffers from rat running, and so they're happy that this might prevent that or stop that. whereas other people, and we will come to talk about this a little bit more, are worried about displacement. So that that's where the traffic moves onto other roads around the sites of the filters. And that Franklin Road is a priority route. So some people are saying that it's not, they don't experience it as a rat run, and some do, but that's obviously the way different residents see their streets. So yeah, some of these concerns will be covered in the questions towards the end of the presentation, and in the time that we have after the presentation as well. Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to hand over now to Tim to talk about the filters themselves and the locations that they are in.
Thank you, Riddy. Thank you, Joe, and good evening, everyone. So I'm just going to briefly just talk through a little bit around the two specific locations, and just a little bit on the rationale of those, and just explain what is actually going to appear in the street as well on the next couple of slides. So Sustrans and the City Council in an ideal world would try and take a kind of an area-wide approach all at once if money was all available at once. So we do have to be cautious if we're just doing one or two of these filters at a time, and they do need good thinking around the rationale. What is the need? What are the around vulnerable users, school children, all of those sort of things, and possible displacement issues. So first of all, the Oak Tree Lane Woodbrook Road junction, as all of you will know, it's near to two large schools, and Oak Tree Lane into Selly Oak Road all the way down to towards Cotteridge is sort of a well-known kind of rat run, if you like, as an alternative north to south route to Linden Road. So one of the rationales is to try and encourage more people to use that corner of Bournville for walking and cycling, to make it feel safer for people going to school. The crossing, obviously a lot of children get off various bus stops and are crossing both ways, really, to go towards children going towards Bournville, but then many going towards Dame Elizabeth Cadbury. So by reducing, changing that cross junction into a T junction, that will reduce a number of the movements of that junction and make it easier to cross. Thank you for moving to the next slide. We're also looking at the moment, there isn't a dropped curb on the sort of Bournville Village Primary School side, so we're looking to try and maybe improve that as part of this sort of temporary trial. So these sort of filters, just to briefly explain, a filter means that motorised traffic can't progress through this junction, but people walking, cycling, wheelchairs, mobility scooters, etc. can. So this is done, can be done by planters, bollards, sort of various means. In this trial sort of situation we're in, an emergency situation, in the main planters are being used because they can be put in quickly. They don't look too horrible, like cones and other things, and so they can make the space sort of permeable, so people can still get through on foot and bike and things, but prevents car usage. So there will be 4 planters is expected, with the width that can still pass through wheelchairs and so on, and mobility scooters, but narrow enough so that cars can't get through. They'll have signage saying that the street's still open to people walking and cycling, but motorbikes and motorised traffic can't sort of pass through. It won't be fully flush with the junction, if that makes sense, so that people walking can still cross, unhindered, so they can access those kind of the drop curbs from both sides, and also so that if somebody is cycling across the junction, they can come to the front of the junction and still be visible. Previously as well, 2 or 3 years ago, just talking about that, there was a community sort of campaign, if you like, with I think it was previous councillors to Fred and Liz. So previously there had been a petition around trying to improve that junction and safety for all the school children especially. just to cover off some of the comments, we do understand, obviously, you've got Bournville Park at the south end of that section of Oak Tree Lane. So there are potential pros and cons of putting the filter at the north or the south end. We are going to monitor that closely. Because of the number of pupils crossing at this north end, it was felt that, you know, it's probably preferable to put it at that north end, but we are going to review that, and we understand those concerns. We're happy to pick up that sort of feedback as well, and keep answering that. Franklin Road, on sort of the Linden Watford Road near the Cotteridge end of Bournville. So the rationale here is sort of twofold. So one is that this, again, there is a crossing patrol person that stands just towards the hairdressers for school children, but there are a large number of school children, for especially Kings Norton girls and boys, that cross both ways in morning and evening. It is a known sort of, you know, bad junction, if you like, and we know that there are several of them in every part of Birmingham, but due to the sort of long straight road, the bus stop, which can add some blindness, the sort of rise from the Cotteridge end as well is a bit of a blind rise, and, you know, speeding, getting across that junction from Franklin to Franklin, whether you're in or getting out from the east side of Franklin, there's various sort of hazards around that junction. So again, by making it into a T-junction rather than a cross roads for motorised traffic, that will remove a lot of the possible turning turns for motorised vehicles. It will stop cars from having to undertake other cars that are turning right from the sort of Tesco north side of Linden Road. And for obviously any pedestrians or cyclists crossing from east to west or west to east, there'll be one less place to look, if you like, for looking out for hazards or looking out for the traffic. There was again, it's a similar situation, but slightly more complicated, this junction, because there is double yellow lines at the end there. We don't want sort of you know, residents or business users parking in that space. It's almost, so it's a slight, what they call a split filter. So there's 4 planters and then another 2 a little bit further back, just where the double yellow lines end. On this one as well, it's a long straight road, so for bin lorries there is plans to have a specially designed sort of bollard in the middle, so bin lorries will still have full access, and on all of these, emergency services are consulted as well as part of the process. So we don't have I'm not an engineer of the design, I'm not involved in that, so I don't know the final exact type of bollard and things, but emergency services and bin lorries will sort of have access for access to there. There has also been a community petition for a safer crossing. Now, it may be that further down the line, if there are second or third phases of further funding, then whether a safer crossing can be put in as well, but then you'd have to look at the east side of Franklin Road, so that can't be covered in an emergency fast track way, because there'd be lots more consultation needed with bus companies and so on, and it would be more expensive sort of build. I hope I've sort of covered everything there, but I'm happy to keep an eye on the questions, and yeah, just one thing as well, this is places for people. Those filters, those junctions, it's not designed just to make, to make an area look worse. The idea is that space can potentially then be used for potentially seating, for to put in some artwork, and there's various examples of that have happened around the country. We've seen a lot more chalk art on the floor, so we will be engaging with local schools to see if there's anything that they can use. We know that Tending for Cotteridge, a local community, have done an amazing thing with planters in Cotteridge near the post office and elsewhere around Cotteridge, so we will be engaging with local gardeners, community groups, so that people can have ownership of those little trees or plants when they go in there.
Thanks, Tim. And just to finish off, Going back to the sort of staged approach to delivery that we mentioned earlier, to sort of give some examples of how this will start to sort of come into effect. The very quick temporary changes to the street can be delivered through sort of temporary traffic management measures. This is what we've done in some parts of the city. So in Kings Heath High Street, where we've suspended on-street parking and put in barriers. We were originally sort of looking at doing this as a way of getting some of the modal filters delivered probably 2 or 3 weeks earlier, but we have had some sort of concerns about how robust that would be and potential for people who maybe not as supportive of the measures to just remove those. So what we're probably doing is a bit of a stage 1.2, where the planters will start to go in, but in terms of the permeability and getting in the collapsible bollard, certainly on Franklin Road, that will be done through traffic management initially. So I think we will move through stage 1, 2 quite quickly. What this does do is open up possibility for some longer term changes, and as you see in the image on the right hand side there, if in sort of 6-9 months time, the feeling is that these closure points have generally worked well and people are keen to see them continue, then there are ways that they can be made more permanent, and then it can start to really sort of transform an area, as you see there. But we are very much at the start of this journey at the moment, and it is really important that what happens next is shaped by local residents and people visiting and using the space. And also every single location is slightly different, and as you've seen for Oak Tree Lane and Franklin Road, the design layouts will be adapted for that particular location. So where we are now is we've shared sort of the details of the proposals as best we can in the current circumstances with timescales and restrictions, but we do, partly because of the funding criteria, need to progress, but also because these measures are almost like the start of the engagement process for the what happens next. We're looking for these 2 trial measures to be implemented this month, probably in the next 2 weeks. I've got a meeting tomorrow morning with the contractor, and from there we should have a clearer timescale in terms of when lining and signage work will be done, and then when the closure points will go in. So we will communicate ahead of closing the road at those points when that's going to happen. We are working with Sustrans and hope to organise some pop-up community events around these locations as long as we can, in line with current restrictions and guidelines, but we are hoping to find ways to organise that. That will be a way of getting some initial feedback and seeing what people think about how it's working, alongside observations. These are being delivered as temporary trial measures, using an experimental traffic regulation order, which can stay in place for a maximum of 18 months, but we have sort of said we're looking at a 6-month trial here. There is potential for changes, modifications to be made, or if it was causing major issues and if for any reason it was felt that they weren't safe, or it was causing sort of intolerable impact on neighbouring streets, they can be removed. Within the experimental order, we can also make some changes. So I know some people have asked about whether the modal filter on Oak Tree Lane would be better located further down near the park, and supporting the walking and cycling link there through the walkway. There is some potential for doing that. What I would say is that we know that there's a bit of a bedding in period with these measures. So what we don't want to do is sort of put something in and then 2 days later say, well, let's move it there, and then 3 days later say, no, let's take it out. You do need to allow a couple of weeks for traffic to adapt and adjust, and for people to find alternate routes on more appropriate road network. So there's a bit of a balance there between potential for some changes, modifications, or removing the measures if ultimately necessary, and it being a bit of a trial and seeing how it works. But as I say, it is very much the start of engagement around tranche 2, and fingers crossed that very soon we will have some news from central government around further funding through Emergency Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, and one of the schemes that we've included in our Tranche 2 application is for Bournville low traffic neighbourhood, building on these two measures. We have a little bit more time for Tranche 2 than we did for Tranche 1, and what that does mean is we will be able to build in more engagement and some more formal consultation, and we do have a bit of an indicative timeline here, all going well with the funding announcement and allocation. What we hope to be able to do is confirm a sort of study area, so what the overall part of Bournville that we're looking to consider for further measures next month. We will then carry out various engagement through the different channels available to us with residents and other stakeholders, so that people can feed into the development and design work, to share some sort of initial options and draft proposals in early December, which we can then consult on. We may also, going back to the 3 stages, be able to do a 1-week trial of some of these measures using that temporary traffic management approach, to sort of see what the impact is. We then look to refine proposals in line with feedback and comments on that, and then we'd then be looking to deliver further measures across Bournville next February. Once again, it would be delivered on a trial basis, so it would come in under an experimental TRO to see how that works, and then we'd straight away look to review how it was going and consider sort of what happens next. We are looking, as I mentioned earlier, at a sort of citywide programme for expanding places for people across Birmingham. I'm working with colleagues to look at how we build this into the Transport and Highways Capital programme. So we do hope very much that this is the start of quite an exciting journey for Bournville. I will come on to questions in a moment. I just want to pause and offer either Liz or Fred to come in with any comments or observations they want to share, and then also for Rebecca to reflect any additional questions we might want to pick up, and then we'll run through some of the questions we've received in advance. So I'll pass across to your local councillors to make any comments they wish to add to this evening's briefing.
Okay, thanks, Joe. It's Liz Clements here, and is it okay if I just kick off briefly?
Go for it.
Yeah, no, just thank you for the presentation, and thanks to everybody who's listening, all the residents who are taking part. And I just wanted to say that I feel that these are pilot measures to test out the low traffic neighbourhood approach, and I think thinking of what I get in my casework, complaints about speeding, pollution, obstructive, selfish parking, and people's concerns about safety on the roads, for themselves, their children, or their older relatives. I mean, that really dominates the casework that we get as local councillors. And I think that we're at a stage where we need to make changes in response to the pandemic. We need to make it safer to cycle and walk, and the government is offering us this opportunity to make some changes quite rapidly. So I think it's quite a good combination of circumstances, and possibly, from my perspective, one of the few positive things that could come out of this terrible COVID experience that we're all having. So, but I think it's really important that everyone understands that that these messages are being piloted. We want to understand what people's concerns are, and respond to any practical difficulties that these 2 pilot measures would pose to people in their daily lives. But I very much hope that the second phase of funding, where we've applied for funding which would support a low traffic neighbourhood across the whole of Bournville and Cotteridge, or a larger area of Bournville and Cotteridge, I hope that's successful, because this is only really two filters, and I understand people's concerns about displacement, and I think that we need to look at an area-wide approach so that everyone can get the benefit of a low traffic neighbourhood where we're cutting down rat running and speeding, and making streets places where you can walk and cycle in safety, where children can play out, and where older residents can walk in safety too. So I hope that everyone can really see the positive opportunity here, while recognising that we as local councillors and officers need to understand that the practical concerns that some residents have got. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor Fred Grindrod, I'm not sure if you wish to add to what Councillor Clements has shared there.
No, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe. If you can hear me, yeah, no, I echo all of Liz's points there. I was with Tim from Sustrans today, looking at the Franklin Road area and what he was talking me through what was going to happen. And even while we were there, it was clear that the confusion and pressure on that area in terms of the traffic. And so it's really good to hear that these proposals are there and being developed and will be trialed. Yeah, as Liz said, we want to make sure that we recognise people's thoughts and views on this, and do encourage people to really get their comments into either the comment Q&A tonight, but also obviously the website that the COVID measures commonplace website. And also, I mean, do feel free to get in touch with Liz and myself through our own kind of council emails if you've got a kind of longer thought that you'd like us to particularly take note of. But yeah, but overall, Joe, I think these two measures are really positive measures, and I really want to thank the groups that have been behind them, and these measures have emerged from our community. They have been thought through and developed by local residents and resident led, and I really just want to continue to encourage that as we move to potentially the bigger project of the wider Bournville low traffic neighbourhood area, to assure residents groups who have been in touch with me, in touch with Liz, that we're keen to hear more from you about what that might look like. But thanks everyone for joining today. I've just realised that how the Q&A works, so I'm reading through that at the moment. So well, thank you everyone for putting those comments in there.
Okay, thank you very much, and it is great to sort of have support from local ward councillors, but also your involvement as elected representatives in feeding back the various sort of comments that local residents are making, and also equally important in highlighting any concerns or any issues that we do need to take on board, and some of these have come up quite a bit in the questions that we've had prior to this evening's session. In terms of the Q&A chat that we've had going on tonight, I've not been able to see most of it, but I know my colleague Rebecca and Tim and Riddy have been sort of keeping an eye on that at times, and that we sort of tried to respond to a few bits where we can. I've got a bit of a sort of summary here of some of the things that have come in advance, but I'm just going to sort of ask if Rebecca wants to highlight any other particular things that have come up in the chat that we'll also then pick up in responding to some of these questions, and then we'll open it up for a few people to respond to particular points.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So there've been lots of questions coming in during the event. As Joe said, we've tried to respond to some of them. If we've not responded to yours, please don't take it personally. And we will also send round in a few days' time a full list of the questions with some response beside each of them. So if we've missed giving you a response now, we will still be sending something round with anonymised questions and some responses. What I wanted to do for Joe now is just pick up a few things that I think weren't necessarily covered in the presentation. So there were things that quite a lot of people were asking, but if they've mostly been covered or they're already in the questions that were submitted, then I won't cover those. But just the things that I noticed that I don't think were covered. The first one was just a few concerns about the role of Sustrans, because Sustrans do have a role as a sort of pressure and campaigning group as well. I think it would just be useful to just clarify what their role is in this project. Another thing that came up was what alternatives we looked at. Why are we looking at modal filters and moving towards low traffic neighbourhoods? What about using planters for chicanes, expanding 20-mile-per-hour areas, that sort of thing? Why the modal filters? Motorcycles was a bit of a concern, because obviously they will physically be able to fit through those modal filters. There's one person on who's a police officer who was saying it could potentially cause an issue if there's somebody trying to make a getaway on a motorbike turning down that road with a modal filter that can't be followed by police vehicles. But I think that was a specific case. I think more generally it's the fact that they do physically fit. What's going to stop them using those? And finally, there were some questions about how people can get more involved in stage 2, because there's a little bit longer to plan on that one. It is still quite quick. It will come sooner than we think, but there is a bit more time and a bit more opportunity. So how can people get involved in those going forward?
Okay, if it's all right, I'll sort of start off with a few sort of comments and pick up on certain points and then invite others to come in. Firstly, just to sort of clarify in terms of the role of Sustrans, on this scheme in particular, Sustrans are a delivery partner supporting us with the scheme, and they have been commissioned to do two things. One is to sort of support community engagement, and Riddy's involvement is very much focused on that. And that links to similar schemes that she's worked on across Birmingham and elsewhere previously, where we talked earlier about doing some sort of pop-up events, looking at how we could maybe have some art activities, some potential gardening, community planting and growing opportunities. Riddy will be supporting and Sustrans will be supporting on some of that community engagement, as they have already done so in some previous online meetings, getting information out in the area. Sustrans have also been commissioned to do some of the design work, and Sustrans does have a sort of a design and engineering function as well. So Sustrans colleagues from that side of the organisation have sort of taken on the design work on these two modal filters. I'm conscious that Sustrans do other things and have other interests as well, and are free to do so from a lobbying and campaigning side, but that is sort of quite separate to this, where that they have been brought on board to support with those two particular elements. I'll go through the questions on the slide very quickly and touch on a couple of the other points that Rebecca's mentioned. I mean, I think we have talked a bit and Tim highlighted some of the rationale behind the particular locations. But in terms of what's planned in terms of future measures and any other locations that we might look at, we have a relative blank sheet of paper on that. And when people ask about getting more involved in stage 2, that is the sort of thing that we do want people to feed into and share suggestions and ideas. Generally, with low traffic neighbourhoods, the approach sort of starts with identifying the area or zone or segment that we're looking at, where there's a set of residential streets bordered by more sort of main or distributor roads, where this sort of through traffic should really be, and that's often the more sort of strategic road network, the A roads, the B roads. It's not always a simple classification, and there are roads that sort of fall in the middle as being sort of main distributor roads, but also sort of very much residential, and we know that people live on main roads, and that's certainly something that we do need to take into account in deciding where the sort of extent of any boundary would go, but that is something we'll be starting engagement on very soon. So we haven't made any decisions on future locations, but what we're looking to do is to remove through traffic from residential streets and to work with local residents around how that's done. We take on board that there are some concerns around potential displacement, and that's been highlighted in some of the comments with these two sort of modal filters in particular. Where's the traffic going to go instead? What we have tried to do is pick a couple of locations where it should sort of send the bulk of the traffic onto the more sort of strategic road network, but we know that in some ways people will then sort of look to find the next cut through, and I think particularly with Franklin Road, we know there's a couple of parallel roads where we will need to monitor that very carefully and see how traffic is adapting and what future action is needed there. So we are sort of fully aware of monitoring that. I think just to sort of say though, there is also, as you saw with Waltham Forest, an extent to which traffic reroutes away from the area altogether, and finds alternative routes completely away from the area, depending on so where people are making longer journeys. Also, by creating an environment where people feel able to walk or cycle for local journeys, some of the trips may remode, so you actually see a bit of traffic reduction across the whole area, as well as on those local areas. Tim, Riddy, do you want to sort of come in a bit and talk a little bit about how we have been communicating with people not online, engaging with schools and businesses, and then I can sort of touch on the consultation side of things.
Yeah, I'll Riddy's leading on this, but I'll let her answer fully. But I was just responding to a question on that really. So we have spoken to the local head teachers. We've sent out information to other local schools and and all local schools were invited to a meeting about it to try and make schools aware. But obviously they've got such a big challenging job at the moment with reopening that we know that the communications maybe aren't getting through, or it's not their priority, so we're going to be picking up those conversations. We've held sort of workshops with Bournville Village Trust and attended other meetings where the likes of Roheath Pavilion and other different churches and local stakeholders were on, so we could brief them. Really, do you want to talk about the sort of the other things that have happened or are going to be happening, such as like the signage and post boxes as well?
Yes, there's a couple of post boxes locally for people to leave comments, so that it's not, they don't have to leave them online. And alongside those, I have ordered some large sort of weatherproof signs that can go up in different locations across the area, so again people will be able to find out a little bit of information. I can't obviously put all the information on those, but at least there's a start of information there, so people are a bit more aware, and then they can be directed to the two locations for the two post boxes, so that's Selly Manor Museum and Roheath Pavilion. And then, yes, of course, we'll be hoping to do lots of pop-ups and on-street engagement, talking to people in different locations. We do have to be careful because, of course, we cannot have too many people in an area at once, so we might have to look at how we manage that. But yes, that's what will be coming as part of the next tranche, and also as part of the continued feedback and continued consultation that is occurring throughout this trial.
Great. And then moving on, I think in terms of formal consultation, we do acknowledge that hasn't taken place on these schemes because of the sort of emergency nature of the situation we're responding to, but also how this is being delivered. So under an experimental traffic regulation order, the formal consultation period actually takes place within the first 6 months of the order. So once these measures go in and the ETRO is sealed, there will be a consultation period through which people can make comments and representations, can log objections, and also it serves as a sort of a live trial. So at the moment, if we did sort of formal consultation pre-scheme delivery, people would have different views on what's going to happen. Some people will think traffic might be displaced to certain places, others may disagree. We don't sort of know the impact, so that happens sort of during the trial. Alongside that, there will be a lot of monitoring taking place because obviously we need to assess these schemes using other metrics and measures as well as what people think, although that is a really important part. In terms of sort of getting a bit of a baseline data, we have got existing counts and measures available to us. So where we do have traffic counts in place, where we do have air quality monitoring points, working with partners at Transport for West Midlands, access to bus journey data, live time, we are able to establish a bit of a baseline here. We do also sort of have to take into account that sort of since March that the whole sort of transport network has changed, and the sort of baseline would be very different to how that would have been this time last year, and it does sort of change on a daily basis, and we are monitoring that in various ways. We will be looking to put some counts in place as part of this scheme. We'll also be setting up resident household surveys so that people are able to respond in terms of their views, and looking at what other measures can take place during that. And then, as I say, alongside that, the feedback that continues through Commonplace, through the comments box at the drop-in events, to monitor those changes. But this is a sort of slightly different way of delivering schemes in that it acts as that live trial. And we will be out in the area, both the City Council and Sustrans, observing how the measures are working, looking at any sort of changes and modifications that are needed, and trying to sort of get something that leads into a more permanent change in future. There's been various sort of questions that have come up within Bournville, but also across the Places for People programme that we did have tried to address through the frequently asked questions document that we circulated, just to sort of touch very briefly on that people will still be able to access their homes and where they currently go to and need to get to, so going from home to the shops, to the doctors, etc. Nothing that we're doing here will stop anyone from being able to access anywhere by car if that's how they need to travel, or if that's how they choose to travel. In some locations it will mean a different route, and in some places it will mean a slightly longer route, and that is how we achieve the benefits of low traffic neighbourhoods, by making some of those changes. Emergency services will be fully informed prior to all the measures going in, so that they're able to update their sat-nav systems, so that in terms of their response they're fully aware of where any road closures are. Just taking on board the point around the motorcycles, because obviously that is a concern that's been raised this evening. I think that the challenge that we have with filtered permeability, and this is not just in something like this, but also on some of our parks and open spaces and green routes, is that there are certain barriers or measures that we could put in that either make it harder or impossible for motorcycles to get through. But what that also does is often causes challenges for other forms of travel that we'd like to encourage, particularly cycling in terms of people using adapted bikes or trikes, but also people in mobility scooters. So what we've had to do is design a modal filter that allows people on bikes, mobility scooters, adapted trikes, etc. to get through. The traffic restriction is a no motorised vehicle restriction, and the signage will include no motorcycles. So motorcycles going through there are committing a criminal offence and can have action taken against them in line with that. But obviously there is that sort of issue around motorcycles cutting through there to avoid chase and capture, and I think we were very happy to work with the police around what measures might be most appropriate there. But there is a real sort of balance in terms of which vehicles can and can't get through, and if we put it in a way where there's no filtered permeability other than people walking through, then we lose the benefits for other measures. So it is a challenging one. We could actually deliver some of these measures with no planters, bollards, barriers at all, just have the signs in place, and it would then be an offence for anyone to drive up there. But without enforcement, you're not sure how much sort of compliance you get there. And waste collection we have touched on a little bit, and with Franklin Road, Tim explained how there'll be a collapsible bollard there, so the refuge vehicle doesn't need to reverse all the way up Franklin Road, which isn't something we'd want, and will be able to get through. We're working with our colleagues in waste and refuge across the city to look at these closures and how measures are delivered as to whether refuge vehicles are able to turn, to reverse for short sections, or if not, to have a way of passing through. And finally, conscious of time, so I want to sort of wrap up. I think people have sort of said about, well, have we not considered any alternatives? I think low traffic neighbourhoods is something that we're delivering as part of the transport plan, but we're delivering that alongside all sorts of other measures, initiatives and various sort of schemes. And although I feel it will play a really big part in bringing improvements in residential areas, it is not a silver bullet that's going to solve absolutely every problem. And there are other challenges we have around speeding, around parking, that we also need to address through some of the other measures available to us. What low traffic neighbourhoods sort of do, and where we feel they have a place, is they are a relatively quick, easy and cheap way of reducing through traffic, and in doing so, meaning that cars aren't dominating these areas, and issues with through traffic are reduced. What you tend to find is if it is predominantly residential traffic in the area, people are less likely to speed in the streets that they live on themselves, because they're more likely to encounter their friends, their neighbours, even their own children. Also some of the other issues around sort of dangerous driving or parking it can be that people are more likely to do that elsewhere than where they live, but it won't necessarily solve everything. We have and are and do consider alternatives within budgets available to us. Some of the other traffic calming measures that include physical traffic calming, speed bumps or chicanes or build outs tend to be more expensive to deliver, and we are limited in the budget that we have for some of those, but there is a need for that. We do deliver local safety schemes, and we are looking to address sort of traffic congestion and other issues across the city, including in Bournville, and in terms of 20-mile-per-hour limits, that's something we'd like to see rolled out across the whole of Birmingham, and are working and asking central government for support on how we do that. I think just sort of explain in terms of some of the lighting, what we're trying to do is locate modal filters where there are sort of existing lighting in place, but also they will include reflective materials and signage on that, and also advanced warning signs in terms of where these measures are going in, so that people aren't sort of turning into a cul-de-sac and the first they realise that the road closed is where they get there. So there will be advanced warning as well, and then this is where I want to provide much advance notice ahead of the road closures going in. Before I wrap up, I'm just going to ask if anyone else on the call wants to provide any other responses to any of these questions or anything else coming up in the chat, and then I will look to close this session in the next minute or two, because I know people have other things to be doing of an evening, and I don't want to keep you for much longer than the hour we said.
Joe, Tim here from Sustrans. Just one word quickly from me is that if my boss was on the line, she would make sure I covered this off. Yeah, Sustrans is a walking and cycling charity. Please look at our website for more information. We don't see ourselves as a lobbying or campaign group, but we do work with local authorities and the government, to make it easier for people to walk and cycle. Yeah, so I'm happy to take more questions on that, separately, and talk to us on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Yeah. Sorry, that's it from me.
That's great. Any other closing remarks from anyone else presenting this evening? Any of the colleagues and councillors on the call? Okay, I'm going to take that as it is time to wrap up. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us this evening, for giving us an hour of your time to find out more about what's proposed in Bournville and the Places for People programme. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it's provided some answers to your questions, although I'm conscious that there will be other things people want to know. And as we mentioned a few times, this is just the start of a much longer journey. I hope that you sort of share my excitement in terms of potential opportunities around creating places for people and low traffic neighbourhoods across the Bournville area. I hope I'll be able to share some good news with you in the next week or so around future funding and explaining how there will be opportunities for people to get involved in that. But in the meantime, please do sort of get involved and provide us with your thoughts and comments and questions through the measures available to you. So we do have the Commonplace site that will stay live throughout the duration of this project. We may look to set up a second page with a bit of a survey for the wider measures, but in terms of what we're doing on Franklin Road and Oak Tree Lane, please do continue to comment on that. As we mentioned, people are free to comment more than once, so if you have already commented, but following on from tonight, there are other things you'd like to share, you're very welcome to make more comments on there. We will continue to monitor that. We get downloads on a weekly basis. If you do have any sort of questions, please do get in touch with us via the email address connected@birmingham.gov.uk, and we will get back to you with a response on that. And we will provide some news in the next week or so in terms of delivery dates for these measures, and hopefully all things being good with what we're able to do in the current circumstances, some sort of small scale pop-up events where people can come along and talk to us about what's happening and what else you'd like to see happening in the area. So finally, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we look forward to working with you in future to deliver places for people across Bournville. Good evening.